You're listening to episode 272 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. John Negru and Michael Glantz join us to celebrate Earth Day and to talk about the plot to save the Earth. Hi everyone. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to mention that this podcast and the supporting website, discussion forums, our live online practice circle, and other services provided by the Secular Buddhist Association are supported by you. If you find this episode or any other offerings helpful to you in some way, I ask that you take a moment and visit secularbuddhism.org and click on the Contributions button. There are many ways you can help which are listed on that page, and if you make a donation, it's tax-deductible and helps ensure the SBA is able to continue the exploration of secular Buddhism. Thank you. We're glad to have you join us on the conversation. One common focus of secular Buddhism is the natural world, the understanding and acceptance of our interdependence upon one another and the environment in which we live. One's contemplative aspirations may extend into ideas about ending rounds of rebirth, but the simple fact remains, we do have this life. We are living on this world, and how we treat it is materially reflective on who we are. Caring for the earth and the future of our environment may be difficult, and facing the realities of its fragility are critical to our ability to take action today. John Negru, Karma Yonten Gyatso, is the founder of Sumeru, a publisher of Buddhist books. He also hosts Canada's leading Buddhist news blog and National Temple Directory. He has worked, published, and taught in the design field for more than 40 years. John came to the Dharma practice in 1968. Over the years, he has served on the boards of several temples and has been involved in a variety of community development projects, including having acted as coordinator for the Toronto Buddhist Federation, Toronto coordinator for the Buddhist Council of Canada, and consultant to the University of Toronto's Buddhist Psychology and Mental Health program. His most recent project with the University of Toronto Department of Religious Studies was a 2-year sociological survey of Canadian Buddhist organizations, key findings of which were published in the Journal of Global Buddhism in 2013. Dr. Michael H. Glantz is a social scientist and director of the Consortium for Capacity Building at the University of Colorado Boulder. His most recent activities have focused on lessons learned about hydrometeorological disaster risk reduction. CCB is now focusing on the concept of El Niño-ready nations and El Niño-ready cities as a 15-country study. He has written and edited over 30 books as well as numerous articles. His books include Climate Affairs and Usable Thoughts on Climate, Water and Weather in the 21st Century. In 2008, Mickey was recipient of the 2008 Clinton Global Initiative. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice earthly delight tea. Our guests today are Mickey Glantz. Mickey, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
And returning is John Negru. John, welcome back.
Thank you, Ted.
Nice to be speaking with you again. So, John, you joined us in episode 225, and that's linked on this episode's page. And so folks who want to know more about John, you can check into that. Mickey, I'm wondering if you would tell us a bit about your background.
Well, it's a varied background in the sense that I started college probably at the wrong time. It was during the height of the Cold War when America wanted engineers. And if you could add 2 plus 2, the guidance counselors in school would send you to engineering or math or physics. And so I wound up as a metallurgical engineer by first degree. And it didn't take long before I realized there wasn't enough contact with humans or dealing with social issues. And I went back to school for a master's and a doctorate in political science and international relations. However, my engineering degree taught me how to think in a slightly different way. And ultimately, I worked on decolonization because I'm old. I had that opportunity really in the 60s to work in decolonization focused on Africa. And after I finished freeing all the countries in Africa, I moved on to work on fighting the climate system. You know, in a way, I figure we're at war with the climate, and we're always trying to see how do we protect ourselves and things like that. So I worked at a research center for climate and society, climate, basically physical stuff, for 34 years. And after a while, I moved in 2008 down to the University of Colorado, where I run a small group dealing with capacity building on climate, water, and weather issues.
Thank you for that. And I'm thinking I would need to connect you and David Loy with his Dharma Retreat Center that's in Colorado and environment-based education. An interesting question, because I now know the answer from our pre-interview talk, but I want to hear the story of how did you two meet? And John, why don't you start with that?
Well, I can start by saying that Mickey is my cousin. His mother and my mother were sisters. And so, of course, I knew him as a child. But really, when I became an adult and I met him as an adult and found out what an amazing resource he is, I basically said, hey, let's be friends as adults. I think that Mickey really has underplayed his biography a little bit here. He is one of the world experts on desertification, on El Nino. When relationships were normalized between the United States and Vietnam, he was the first American invited back to come and do work there. So he really is a tremendous resource and the author of I don't know how many books, gazillions of books and so on. So I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to be his friend simply because we happen to be cousins.
Great. And Mickey, how about you? What's your early recollection of meeting John, and what's it been like getting to know your cousin as adults?
Well, I remember John when I was just a kid myself, but I was maybe some years older, maybe 10, 5, 8 years older. And so I remember as a little kid, about 4 or 5 years old. And, I loved seeing them. Our family drove to Montreal. We spent time with the family there. And I always had a love for Montreal and Quebec, actually. Probably inspired me to take French in high school and cultivate that language. I did get a chance to go back for a semester and gave a lecture tour across Canada in each of the provinces. And when I hit Montreal, I got to stay at McGill for a while, a semester or so, and got to lecture there and interact with the staff, and get to know John's family, mother especially, and she was my favorite aunt. We just kept in touch, and then John and I reconnected some time ago. And relatively most recently, I shared this notion of plot to save the planet, which is actually the name of a book I saw And when I was in Nepal, I just started to push the concept. We'll probably talk about that in a bit, but that's we have several links, bonds.
So we're recording this felicitously on the weekend of Earth Day. And John, let's segue into that. Can you tell us about how and when the plot to save the planet got started?
I think I can go back to 1972 when I read Limits to Growth by the Club of Rome when I was in university, and was very taken by that. Back in the 1970s, when I was a graphic designer, I did a lot of work for Canadian environmental organizations, Pollution Probe, Energy Probe, Canadian Environmental Law Association, some Sierra Club work, and so on. And I became very, I don't know what the word would be, concerned, excited with the importance of environmental work. And that's been a part of what I've been involved with ever since. And so when Mickey came to me and said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing," I wanted to be a part of it. I said, "Hey, let's do something. Let's make this into something more than just an idea." And that's how that aspect of it came to be.
Mickey, how about you? What do you want to add to that? How did that grow?
Well, actually, I have these ideas. I'm a realist, so I know that a lot of ideas are like pushing a rope, even good ideas. But I came across a concept that I like very much, and it's called social invention. And it's about things like the space age and different ideas. Earth Day is another one. How they can motivate, how ideas can be used to motivate large numbers of people. And I thought one of those ways was that notion of a plot to save the earth, because planning, waiting for a government to do it, doesn't seem to be going so well right now, especially from the U.S., but in other countries as well. It depends a lot on leaders and convincing the people around the leaders to convince the leader that Earth is worth saving. They don't see it quite that way, and there's a lot of kicking the can down the road. In the U.S., we have political people who make laws and decisions, and they're in for 2, 4, or 6 years, and they don't really think that they have to think past their 2 years to get reelected, or 4 years, or 6 years. So that's why these problems get pushed onto the future. Future generations wind up suffering, cleaning up for the last several generations. So the notion of a plot made it a bit more interesting to me, a plot to save the earth. And we have to plan and plot. We can't, and we're always having to push a rope or a wet noodle. It's just very difficult. So anyway, that's how I got into this. And then I decided, God, I like this notion. And I was in Nepal, and I saw an elderly man sitting at a kick press sewing machine. Tat 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 tat. They're kicking to keep the energy going, not on electricity. And they were doing T-shirts. And I asked if he does patches, and he said he could. So I decided to buy a couple hundred patches from him, and he made them all within a week, less than 3 days, 4 days, by hand. And it was a plot to save the earth with the eye of Buddha in the middle. And I've forgotten the other one. There are a couple different designs I had just scrolled out right there. And just from a piece of paper, this guy produced these beautiful patches. And then I sent some to John. John really liked the idea of it as a movement. I was handing these out to people or sending them and saying, you must take a photo and hold it up, plot to save the planet. somewhere that you feel of interest for the environment. And a woman from the U.S. Used it to take one underwater for dying coral. Another guy in Mexico held it up for smoking Popocatépetl volcano and things like that. So just, kind of trying to connect to the environment and the fact that there are a lot of people that want to save the planet. We're not necessarily in power, but we have to be heard somehow.
We can be empowered.
Right. And in keeping with this idea that you brought up of social invention, it looks like the core gathering place online is this Facebook group. And I'm wondering if you could say just a bit about that. Is it the right spot for people to look for in this? And by the way, I do have it linked on the episode page.
Sure. So the Facebook group is called Plot to Save the Earth. We decided not to use the same title as the book because we didn't want copyright issues with that. But basically it is a global eco-Buddhist initiative. There's about 540 members all over the planet. And basically we ask people not only to post pictures of their patches, but also to post any stories that they think are interesting, relevant to engage Buddhist action or environmental action, whether it's Buddhist or not. And really, we're trying to make it not United States centric.
Mickey, is there anything you wanted to add to that and just the intention of the Facebook group?
No, I'm a latecomer to Facebook, Twitter and all that, but I am there. And I believe it's a great way to relate to others who share common wishes. It's not just that. I mean, on other Facebook sites, it's a bit more combative. Because I'm doing political issues and politics from the U.S. and stuff like that. But it's hard to be against the planet. A lot of people don't realize how to help. Or I remember I used to have a column called the Environmental Minute, and I remember writing one about ECO, ECO, and because ECO is a big it's used a lot. Eco-economic, eco-anthropo, whatever. Yeah, eco stuff. But what I did was I did an article on eco, and I called it Environmental Committees of One. And I wrote an article, and an elderly woman wrote, and she said, I have no money, I'm living on my pension and all that. And, I get all these requests from the Sierra Club and various foundations, and they want me to donate, and I can't. I feel guilty. And I told her not to feel guilty. I mean, it's a personal letter she wrote, actually. And I responded, I said, don't feel guilty. You do what you can. If you can't recycle, you can't recycle. If you can, do it. If you can't recycle paper, but you can't do it. Whatever you do is a plus. And she shouldn't feel that way. And then that's when I came up with this environmental, it reinforced my view of do what you can. And that's that ECO as an environmental committee of one.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It brings up this idea that because I had been a member of one of those organizations before, and as soon as I joined, I got literally, I'm not exaggerating, 3 paper pieces of mail a week. And I was just thinking about the horrible deforestation that, in this case, the Sierra Club was doing. And so when they showed up on my door asking, oh, we'd love to have you back, I'm like, I'm sorry, here's why. You guys are really not doing what you say you're going to do. Everything is an alarm. I get that it's important, but we can't just endlessly empty our pocketbooks to you, and you got to stop destroying the forests in your attempt to save them. And so you bring up this idea of, it's not just about giving money. There are things we can do as people to help save the planet, which is the intent behind this.
It's also not the intention to assume that somebody else is going to take responsibility for these things, like the Sierra Club or Energy Probe or the EPA. It's important for each one of us to do what we can with whatever resources we have in our own immediate lives, and not just to assume that somebody else is going to take it on for us and we're going to be cheering on the sidelines. That's a kind of slacktivism that I see a lot these days. And I even see it in our Facebook group, because it's supposed to be egalitarian and it's supposed to be engaging for everybody. But I'm disappointed in some ways at the low level of active participation by people. They're happy to be part of the group. They're happy to read the posts, but I wish that people would step up more and tell others about what they're doing. I'd just like to mention at this point that there's been some evolution in the group, in the sense that Mickey's original idea, when we formed the group, we also partnered with an environmental group in Nepal called Small Earth Nepal, and Dhiraj Pradhananga is the third administrator of our group. And our intention now is that if people want to get a patch and send some money to defray the costs, all of that extra money goes to support environmental causes in Nepal, which, of course, since we started the group, suffered a terrible earthquake a few years back. And also we've asked that new patches, as we get them made, are made by micro businesses that are run by women. So we're really trying to do the right thing here in any possible way that we can.
Thank you for sharing that, because it brings in this concept that we get to choose how we do things, like the patches, for example, and putting in requirements about these being supportive of people in need, of areas in need, of diversity and equity and inclusion and women-owned efforts. That's one of the ways in which you can live these values. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask, social activism and care for the environment might not be explicit Buddhist values. There are, for example, polycanon statements about protecting the planet and picking up your garbage and stuff like that. How do you see this work as being a manifestation of your practice? John, let's start with you, and then Mickey, I want to ask you the same question.
Well, I explained my own coming to environmental activism, but I think that if you look at some of the prominent Buddhist teachers of the day, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Karmapa, the Gyalwang Drukpa, many Buddhist teachers are now taking environmental care for the earth as part of their practice, and making it part of Dharma practice for all those people who respect and admire and want to follow them. So, for instance, the other day I saw a movie called Pad Yatra, which is about an environmental walk organized by the Drukpa sect in Ladakh, where basically hundreds of people walk through the Himalayas collecting garbage and teaching locals about effective ways of incorporating plastic or not incorporating plastic into their lives. And this movement has now spread to Sri Lanka and other countries in Asia. So yes, it's true that you won't find explicit reference to care for the planet or environmental issues in the original sutras and tantras, but that doesn't mean that the teachers of today don't see it as an incredibly important issue.
I'm reminded of that cartoon where it's a scientific conference and it's about global warming, and one of the people says in the cartoon says something about, but what if it's all a hoax and we do all this environmental stuff for nothing? This is not for nothing. It's important all on its own. It's okay to support this, even if there's not a dollar return at the end of it. Mickey, how about for you? How is this work being a manifestation of just how you are in the world, why it's important.
Well, I actually backed into the environment, to be honest, and the way I backed into it was doing studies on famine in West Africa back in late 60s and early 70s. And that led me to not just the politics of famine and the economics of famine, but it led me to the environmental contributions that are made unwittingly to famine. For example, in those days, and I was an engineer once, and it sounds good. You're in an arid area. There's no rain. What do? You build deep wells. You go in and put in permanent wells. And what happened is you found that by doing that, fixing that problem, what happened was that herders, nomads would stay around the well because the water became permanent source as the animals ate the vegetation. And by the time all the vegetation that was reachable was gone, it was impossible to get the herds to the next well. So most of the animals died of hunger, not of thirst. In the process, they denuded the surface of the earth with, even in deserts, there's vegetation, and it was either trampled or eaten and whatever. And so they, if you asked a nomad, what would you do next time? You had 100 animals and you lost 50. What would you do? And the answer, and this is from a survey, the answer of the nomad was, next time I'll have 200, thinking that half will survive. But if you have 200, all will die. So there's some balance between the human activities and what nature can support. So, but my first concern was about the famine and food insecurity. And this is where social inventions come up again to me. We talk about food security. There's only food security for certain populations, even in rich countries. Most people are food insecure. Most countries are food insecure. But the phrase that's used by the UN and other organizations is food security. So Burundi has food security, but it's at a 20% level or 30, that kind of thing. That's really food insecurity. And people who could be helping outside of these countries think there is food security, but there isn't. And they think, well, if there's food insecurity, then I don't have to do anything. We're not calling things as they are. And that's why social inventions are, I think, pretty, the right concepts, right words that pique someone's interest. A lot of environmental changes like global warming. Well, every environmental change in which humans are involved, I would almost say almost everyone, is what I call a creeping environmental change. It's like air pollution. Today's like yesterday. Tomorrow's like today. Not so bad. I have other pressing problems to deal with. But in 5 years, the air is purple. You say, you backed into it and you started accepting a little bit of degradation, because we don't have that foresight to live 30 years or 20 years or 10 years. We only look out for the present in many ways. So this notion of creeping environmental change is an important one as well. Global warming, air pollution, soil erosion, the land degradation, deforestation. One tree. And then all of a sudden there's no forest. So you have to somehow use these ideas to get people, it's like there are many ways to slice a salami and not everyone likes them. Just, do it on slant. If they don't get it, go in one direction, go another direction. You have to capture attention, and no one social invention captures everybody.
It's so easy to be demoralized in this day and age about what's going on with our only home. I think that a lot of people, when they're faced with the news, and if they have any sense of confidence in real evidence-based science, it's very easy for people to say, oh, I give up. I'm just going to live my life and do what I can to make my life better. But I think the flip side of what Mickey is saying is that those creeping changes can also be for the better. If each one of us says, no, I'm going to store my food in glass jars instead of plastic bags, or I'm going to eat one less burger a week, or whatever it happens to be, that cumulative force can also be a good creeping environmental change. And I think that since Mickey and I started dealing in this space many years ago, one of the big social idea changes has been open source and crowdsource. And I think people recognize the power of communication with others and working together with others on issues much more than they ever did back in the day. And that makes me encouraged.
If I can just suggest something, maybe creeping environmental change is a new one. Okay, I've been writing about it for quite some time, but I'm writing in academic circles and maybe policy circles. I don't know, but there are other concepts that people can relate to that they may have heard before. The tragedy of the commons. If we don't, all protect some pasture, and there's one rogue person that thinks it all belongs to him, then it can't survive. It's called the tragedy of the commons. The other was the recognition that we're all on a spaceship. Earth, the planet is, we're alone, so to speak. And we're like a spaceship. And you have to be self-sustaining within what you got in that spaceship. John mentioned limits to growth. When that came out in 1972, there was a reaction. How could there be limits? We've got all these resources. We can get them. And in 1972 was the first UN conference, actually, a global conference on the environment. It was the Stockholm Conference. But if you go back and look at that 1972 conference report, there's no mention of global warming, deforestation, desertification. A lot of our problems today were maybe under the radar screen back in 1972, and they all emerged by 1992 when they had the 20-year anniversary of that conference. So limits to growth, lifeboat ethic. We have to help others. We're in the lifeboat, but many people are not in the lifeboat. They're in the water. How do we save them? To me, it comes back to people, not just the planet. See, the planet, I've written this somewhere, but the planet doesn't need us. We need the planet. We need ecosystems. We depend on them, and we destroy them. See, and then we come up with chemicals to replace them, which continues to worsen the situation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Carl Sagan's pale blue dot. Yes. And I'll be adding, for folks who are listening to the episode, I'll be putting in several books and a few other references here, including that particular piece that talks about this really being the only home we know.
Don't forget to include Buckminster Fuller in that list. He's the one who came up with that spaceship Earth concept. I think nowadays there's two dynamics going on. One is that, as Mickey said, as time has progressed, we've been able to articulate more clearly what the environmental issues are as they present all of these unintended consequences of our actions. But also, I think that we suffer from a collective amnesia about all of the work that's been done in this area before. This is not some new thing that somebody woke up one morning and said on Facebook, oh, let's have Earth Day. It's important for people to go back and look at what earlier people said about this stuff. I don't remember the Thai monk's name at the moment, but he wrote a book about the impact of emerging technologies and a Buddhist response to those quite a few years ago. The book is out of print. Why is it out of print? Why isn't limits to growth still available and talked about. Why is Buckminster Fuller an oddity in some dark corner of the internet on YouTube if you go to look him up?
It's all about buckyballs, and that's it.
Yeah. You can see in the American administration now the amplified amnesia of the people who are in charge of the boat. And it's pretty scary.
There's something, though, if I can jump off of that. I was influenced a long time ago by a British guy, a British historian named Bullock. I don't remember his first name. And he gave a lecture somewhere. I saw the write-up of it in Oxford or Cambridge. And it was entitled, "Does History Have a Future?" And, does the academic discipline have a future? I like that. And then I piggybacked it to say, does climate history have a future? And I've done this since the 70s, 80s, 90s, all that. But there's something new happening now that just happens. It's not something I realized at the time, but there is something looking back that I would call the century effect. Okay. We crossed a century mark. So what's happening now are people are not looking at anything written before 2000. I grew up in school in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. We never looked back to the 1800s unless it was literature, poetry, or we took a history course. But the environment became an issue in the 60s and 70s. You can find little paperbacks about traffic and air pollution and things like that. This is where Earth Day came from. It came with that Stockholm conference. So, we environmental history has a future. And I've seen new journals on disasters where the editors are saying to the people who submit papers, don't refer to anything before 2005. A major publisher saying use the latest references. And that's this kind of CNN effect where you must have the latest news. I have to check every 5 minutes. But we have to make sure that courses and classes and discussions and lectures and placards carry some of these earlier names to carry them forward. Tragedy of the Commons was really influential in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. Lifeboat ethic was Spaceship Earth, the tiny blue marble, that notion. Hey, we are alone out here in space. So I think all that's pretty important. And the century effect is how to beat it. How do we get people? But you have to remember the kids in school today who are 17, 18, 19, 20 were born after 1990. So there is no history of the Cold War or any of that stuff. And we have to kind of remind where we came from.
Yeah, otherwise we lose that trend of understanding, which we can't have a comprehensive understanding without that background.
Well, you have to, the phrase that someone had said was, you have to look back to look ahead. I mean, you have to keep an eye on the past as well as on the future. But we tend to discount the future. You say, they weren't as smart 10 years ago as we are now. That kind of thing. So you have to watch out for that.
Mickey, was there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners?
There is one thing, yes. Some time ago, I think I became disgruntled with Earth Day, okay? Because it's Earth Day, people come out, they organize things and all that stuff. But I wrote an editorial, which we can link to somehow, if need be. And it was called Down with Earth Day, Up with Earth Year. And let's make this something we're thinking every day. It's not just let's have an Earth Day party. Now, it's getting more serious because certain governments, like the American one, doesn't believe in climate change and clearly doesn't want to do anything to thwart it. But I think we have to make it more frequent, more recurrent than April, mid-April, once a year.
Yeah, it needs to be an embedded part of our lives every day, not just once a year.
The true believers, but how to get into that old elderly woman who wrote me about what can I do. She really was an Earth Day person who wants to do it every day.
John, how about you? What else would you like to share with the listeners?
Well, I would like to say that this is a global issue. We have environmental issues in Canada that are just as pervasive and bad as the United States. So everybody needs to be involved. And as far as being involved, because this podcast is specifically about the Plot to Save the Earth Facebook group, I would just like to encourage people to show the love by going to the Facebook group, and you can find there the information about how to get a patch. Send me your information and a check to cover the costs, and anything else you would care to donate. All of that extra money goes to Nepal earthquake relief activities from Small Earth Nepal. And get out there and show your love for Mother Nature. Take a selfie with Mother Nature in your patch and put it on the group page. And hopefully that will inspire you to do other things in your own community. Start where you are, use what you can, and do what you can do.
Our guests today are Mickey Glantz. Mickey, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
And John Negru. John, thank you for being here as well.
Thank you as always, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.